restart officially. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. For those of you I haven't met, my name's Jim Watterston. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Education here at Melbourne University. Very proud to be that Dean and certainly proud to be part of this event this afternoon. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional owners of the land I'm on today, and I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that you're situated on, bearing in mind that we are online today. Indigenous Australians have been custodians of the lands and waterways in Australia for 60,000 years, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I also welcome you all to this policymaker workshop today to launch Jack Keating's policy paper, Seeing Ourselves at School, Increasing the Diversity of the Teaching Workforce. It is a really important issue, and I want to acknowledge Associate Professor Suzanne Rice, Dr. Alice Garner and Professor Lorraine Grahaham, who you can see on the screen, for their wonderful work in producing this beautiful report. And I'm sure you have been able to access that online, but if anyone wants a copy of the hard copy, then we'd only be too pleased to supply that to you. The report itself discusses the way Australia's teacher workforce does not currently reflect the diversity of the Australian population. And it puts forward some really important initiatives that can increase the diversity of the teaching workforce. Today, following the formal lunch, the authors will provide an overview of the paper and a discussion of the recommendations. There will also be opportunities to focus on how systems and researchers can work together on increasing diversity into the future. We really appreciate the people that have been able to make it along today, especially our colleagues from the Victorian Department of Education and Training who have joined us, alongside a range of other colleagues from around Australia, from New South Wales, from Western Australian Department of Education, from schools, from other higher education providers, and including participants from the Philippines National University. So we've got a very eclectic range of people with us, and I'm hoping that we'll all contribute to that discussion. So we're really pleased that you could all join us. I'd also like to take the opportunity to welcome Jack Keating's family, friends and colleagues who are joining us online, including Jack's wife, Linnell Gibson. For those that may not be familiar with Jack's work, he was an inspirational educator, mentor, researcher, and a highly regarded and respected academic in the global education community. He was an influential scholar and a policy advisor, a caring friend to all, and a champion to the disadvantaged, a loving and dedicated husband and father. And Jack's work continues to be referenced and reflected within our faculty and across the education landscape. So he's constantly in our thoughts, and we recognise his amazing research and contribution. So it's great to have you all here today, especially you, Linnell, and the family. And so I'm going to hand over to you now to speak further about Jack's legacy and to launch this paper.
Thank you very much, Jim. First, I want to begin by thanking the team. Suzanne, Alice, Lorraine, you guys have done an awesome job and tackled a very wicked question, which is what we wanted with this money. It has enormous policy and social justice implications, which is the focus of the Jack Keating Scholarship. And I just want to tell a short story about somebody we met for whom the reason we need something like this. When Jack won this Commonwealth Relations Trust Scholarship to London University, one of the first people we met and befriended was somebody called Lily Toyoti. Lily was a Samoan woman living in New Zealand. Her family had moved to New Zealand when she was a young girl because they wanted her to have a better education than she was going to get. When she arrived in New Zealand, she sat an exam that decided whether you went into the A stream or the B stream. Lily topped that exam. They put her in the B stream because she was an islander. After about a month, the teacher said, this kid's in the wrong stream, put her in the A stream. So she was eventually put into the A stream. First they made her resit the exam and she topped it again. So the view was there's something wrong with the exam if she's managed to get the highest score. Later on, when she was 15, she just thought she might do a business course. And she said to her accountancy teacher at the school, I'd like to do accountancy. And he said, don't bother, because in a year you'll have a baby on your hip and another one on the way. So she didn't do accountancy. She got into medical school at Auckland University. And the first question everybody asked her, do they give special scholarships to islanders? She said, I'm not doing medicine anymore. I'm going to become a teacher. And she went off and became a teacher. That story always upsets me because it's so typical. Not only did she become an educator, while we were in London, she was interviewed for a job at a school, a very large school, Western Springs College in Auckland, that had a substantial Maori and Islander population. She became principal of that school. And she said, in this school, we will value your culture and we expect you to do well. We do well. And they did. She's gone on to be on the South Pacific Qualifications Authority. She's worked all over the South Pacific as a very senior official, but they wanted to put her in the B stream because there were no people like Lily teaching at that school. So that's such an important thing. And I think that this is going to be a fantastic legacy for those kids who are neurodiverse, disabled, from minority groups, of a different skin color, from migrant families. If we can start having a teaching force that reflects them, then they can be what they see. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Laniel, and I think we'll move on now to our presentation. I'll just explain to people what will be happening. We'll be spending about 30 minutes discussing the findings of the report. We're going to talk through a little bit about some potential future research directions, and we're keen to hear from people who might like to be involved in that or in a research network we'd like to set up that's looking at this. So, Janelle, if we can start with the slides. Oh, and we'll have time for questions at the end, of course. Okay, if we can move through. So Jim has acknowledged the traditional custodians. We'd like to pay our respects to elders past, present and future, and extend that respect to all of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who've made a contribution to the life of the university. So we'd also like to thank Laniel and the Jack Keating Policy Fund. Jack was a mentor to me, a tremendous champion for equity in education, and his legacy lives on. And it was so exciting to be awarded the grant and be given the opportunity to undertake this work. We'd also like to acknowledge the advice and contributions of our 6 reviewers who provided us with feedback on the draft report, and I know have strengthened the quality of the report through that feedback. So the first question, Janelle, thank you. Oh yes, I'd like to start first of all with the story with which we start the report. So the activist and teacher and speaker Stella Young had a viral TED talk in which she talked about turning up at a school, and the talk was called "I'm Not Your Inspiration, Thank You Very Much." And she talked about turning up at a school, and she was there as an initial teacher education candidate, and she was teaching a legal studies class. And she's about 20 minutes into the lesson, and one of the students puts up his hand and says, well, you know, when are we getting to the inspirational bit? And she's sort of, I'm sorry, what? And he says, you know, normally people like you, they come and they talk at the hall and they tell us inspiring stories. And she realised that this student had never thought about or seen disabled people with disability in a situation where they were just part of the normal workforce and doing work like teaching. And she ended that particular story with the quote, I want to be part of a world in which a year 11 student is not even slightly surprised, one bit surprised, that his teacher is a wheelchair user. And so that was, if you like, a springboard for our work in this area. So if we move on to the next slide, thanks, Janelle. So the first question, of course, is why does teacher workforce diversity matter? And we've looked through quite a bit of the research on this, and I'll just briefly outline that. Much of this research, I will say that the US has had a focus on teacher workforce diversity for a great deal longer than a number of other countries, including our own, I think, and that a lot of this research has been done in relation to increasing the number of Black teachers and the impact of Black teachers on students of colour in the United States. So we're drawing from that research. So why does this workforce diversity matter? Janelle, are we able to, sorry, have the, thank you. Oh, underlying this is a theory which is termed representative bureaucracy. And representative bureaucracy essentially argues that you will get better policy and better outcomes if you have a bureaucracy that actually reflects the population for which policy is being formed. And this has been used to examine public policy and consider the impacts on public policy. It is also starting to be applied also to the teacher workforce. So some of the research on why teacher workforce diversity matters. So the first finding is that it tends to increase achievement of minority groups. And there is fledgling research that is starting to show that, in fact, it's not just the minority groups. Increasing the representation of minority groups may potentially also increase the achievement of students from non-minority groups. The mechanisms through which some of this are likely to occur. So first, there's the notion that teachers from minority groups will be role modelling. They'll be role modelling success for their students and showing that students like me can be in positions of leadership. They can help students navigate structures and cultures that may well feel foreign to them. So that often our schools, coming from fairly middle-class perspectives, urban perspectives, and they can help students understand how that works. They tend to have higher expectations of students from the minority groups, and there's considerable research on the impact of teacher expectations on student achievement. Some of the saddest findings are that Black teachers in the US are much more likely to recommend Black students for gifted and talented streams, much in keeping with Lynelle's story at the start. And so they will have higher expectations, and this is reflected in higher student effort and achievement. They've also been found to build relationships with outgroups so that they would be more likely to be able to talk well. For example, a teacher who's from an Indigenous background can have better capacity to support the building of relationships with Indigenous students and parents. They can also build understanding of cultural issues across the staff where there isn't an awareness of those things. They can promote positive attitudes towards the outgroup. And there's also considerable research on, general research on diverse workforces across the organisational literature showing that diverse workforces will tend to function better, they have better productivity and outcomes overall. Finally, in regard to teachers with disability, there's a small but growing body of research which tends to suggest they will have higher empathy for students with disability. They tend to have a greater capacity to differentiate. They bring the experiences of being with a disability in the classroom to their teaching. And as part of that, they also use new pedagogical approaches that allow for greater accessibility for their students with disability. And finally, they tend to promote positive attitudes across the school and be role models for the students with disability. So those are some of the key benefits that have been found in the literature on why teacher workforce diversity matters. So to talk a little bit now about how well our teacher workforce reflects the broader population, I'll hand over to my colleague Lorraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. And we're so pleased you're all here this afternoon to share this launch with us and to hear about the report. And obviously, what we needed to do as a starting point was to get a snapshot of what the current Australian teaching workforce looks like. And this table provides a snapshot. It compares the percentages of the Australian population or the workforce population to the percentages of the teacher workforce, and where the data were not available for some of the measures, we looked at the percentage of the initial teacher education undergraduate course completions to estimate the teacher workforce. So what we can see from this table is that there is still a distance to travel before the profile of the teaching workforce is broadly aligned to that of Australian society, and that some data is missing entirely. So for people with disability, those not born in Australia, Indigenous peoples, those from low SES and from regional and rural settings, they are not yet fully represented. And males have been underrepresented in teaching for decades, with this figure declining since the 1970s. Importantly, I think we should add to this slide that when we were considering disability, for example, we did consider it as a multifaceted construct that changes over time and through the lens of intersectionality. It's a wicked problem. There's a couple of wicked problems, and of course, wicked problems abound in education. The ones that we are addressing with our report, they are important to articulate because research has the capacity to address and ameliorate some of the issues at their heart. Our paper contributes to addressing two interrelated issues. The first is that weaker educational outcomes occur for certain equity groups or among certain equity groups. And secondly, that there is an ongoing issue of staffing in those schools that enrol large numbers of such students. Both of these are ongoing and stubborn policy problems. In terms of our project now, in this report, there's a focus on 4 groups of teachers. As you can see, we've listed them here. We selected these groups because they are where underachievement is ongoing, an ongoing issue for students, and where the research also suggests, as Suzanne has alluded to, that teachers drawn from these backgrounds are likely to raise the achievement of learners. This is important. In terms of intersectionality and achievement, there we go. I also want to note again that we are aware of the complexities. And as Ortiz and colleagues in 2020 commented when they were writing about a single access approach to education policy, the quote is that success is unlikely if educational programs address one student identity marker at a time. And we just want to say that the same is true for teachers. In terms of the research questions that we addressed in their entirety, they are, first of all, what initiatives have been undertaken nationally and internationally to increase teacher workforce diversity? Secondly, what evidence exists regarding their efficacy? And regarding this, we did look to include those initiatives that had been evaluated and had accrued evidence of some form. Thirdly, what does the literature reveal about the workplace structures, systems, and cultures that support the attraction and retention of a diverse workforce? And lastly, what lessons might the answers to these questions hold for Australian policymakers and school leaders? The method. We took a scan of initiatives to understand what strategies policymakers in Australia and similar countries are using to attract and retain teachers. Our emphasis was on recruiting, attracting teachers, but both elements of the issue require attention, of course. And as mentioned, we specifically looked for initiatives that had been evaluated and had evidence behind them. You can see the jurisdictions that were included in the scan on the slide. And we chose these jurisdictions so that we had the chance to look at the largest Australian employers of teachers and those in English-speaking countries that share a similar past as we do, where the teaching workforce has historically been overwhelmingly middle class and white, and also where teacher workforces are not yet representative of the broader populations. In terms of the search terms that we used becoming a teacher, scholarships to become a teacher, support to become a teacher, teachers with disability, etc. And then a broader search where we named each jurisdiction and then added Department of Education support to become a teacher. We undertook this scan in the time period from February to April in 2023. And as this is such a fast-moving space, it's very possible that we miss some initiatives, and we'll be asking later in the presentation for you to alert us to anything that you're aware of that we might not have captured. So we know that there's things that have been happening since, and also the span, as I said, was quite limited for our scan, which was February to April 2023. Okay. In terms of the recruitment initiatives, just broadly, when you look at them as a whole, we chose large jurisdictions because there's an economy of scale at work, and the economy of scale facilitates the development of workforce recruitment and retention initiatives. So these initiatives, they might be designed to encourage the recruitment of new teachers or focus on retention of existing teaching staff. Some initiatives focused on only one element, some focused on both attraction and retention, and many of the initiatives we found overlapped. For example, some of the Grow Your Own programs may also have financial support attached that encourages retention. In this diagram on the slide, we thought about targeted initiatives as meaning targeted to a specific group, such as scholarships for students from regional or rural areas, for example. In terms of semi-targeted, these were initiatives that were focused on more than one of the targeted groups rather than a specific group. And inadvertent refers to those initiatives that were not targeted to one of the minority groups per se, but they were likely to support one or more of them. For example, the Troops to Teachers program necessarily includes some individuals with disabilities. So I'm going to hand over now to Alice, who's going to continue with some examples of the initiatives that we reviewed.
Thanks, Lorraine. So I'll talk through the kinds of initiatives we looked at and want to note that they sometimes overlap, so the definitions are somewhat fluid. And while we found many different programs that addressed workforce diversity to varying degrees, it was quite rare that they'd been evaluated, or if there were evaluations, that they'd been shared publicly. So that has limited to some degree what we could find out about the programs. Let's start with Grow Your Own programs. So the idea of Grow Your Own is to develop the teacher workforce by supporting people who are already involved in schools, like education support staff, to undertake initial teacher education and in time take on a role as a fully qualified teacher in their local school community. Some Grow Your Own programs target young people in secondary education. We'll touch on that in a later slide. Grow Your Own programs usually involve close partnerships between schools, universities and community-based organisations. And they're quite common in the US, where over 20 states have passed laws since 2017 explicitly allowing, creating, oh, I've got to fly, or funding Grow Your Own programs. And about half of those state-based initiatives identify workforce diversity as a goal. A very early example of a Grow Your Own program was the California Mini Corps, established back in 1967, which is still going and which focuses on rural migrant students. Participants gain over 3,000 hours of classroom experience compared to California's base requirement of 600 hours for pre-service teacher education. And according to Carver Thomas in 2018, about 80% of Mini Corps participants have gone on to pursue teaching. In Australia, there are some existing Grow Your Own type programs, for example, in the Northern Territory, New South Wales and WA. Most are focused on supporting the training of Indigenous or migrant or rural and remote teachers. And these schemes may not always identify themselves as Grow Your Own, but have many similar features, including drawing on participants' existing relationships within schools and local communities. There is a spectrum in Grow Your Own program design, from offering financial support for pathways into initial teacher education to ongoing mentoring, through to more ambitious schemes which invite participants to co-design their ITE experience and help transform teaching practice to meet the specific needs of communities that they might belong to or work with. And research suggests that Grow Your Own programs do have a demonstrable impact on both diversity and retention. But many of the existing Grow Your Own programs have not been evaluated, so there's definitely a need for more work in that area. Then we have residencies and internships, modelled on medical internships, which bring candidates into schools from the beginning of their teacher training, where they're closely mentored by experienced teachers. They teach actively from the start while they complete their qualification. These programs usually have a supply focus on hard to staff schools or high need subject areas or regions. They can strategically anticipate need and respond by embedding teachers in locations where demand is or is projected to be greatest. And while residencies are usually focused on supply issues rather than on increasing the diversity of the teacher workforce per se, by providing both a salary during training and a mentored and supported entry into teaching, they may indirectly increase diversity by addressing financial and social barriers. In the US, there's a stronger diversity focus to residency programs than is perhaps so evident in Australia, though it seems that might be changing. The evidence on residencies is mixed, though, when it comes to both teacher retention and student achievement. And when we look through a diversity lens, there's some evidence that those programs which are academically selective may reduce teacher diversity. So there are some important research questions and a need for more work there. We've got a table with some other initiatives or types of initiative. Janelle, if you can move forward, and we'll whip through some. Oh, sorry. Yeah, okay, that was just the residency information and some different examples. And yeah, okay. So here we've got some other types of initiatives that we looked at with a range of sort of evidence available about their effectiveness. So I'll just go through these in the next slides. The next one is high school teaching academies. And the idea here is that high school students can be encouraged to consider teaching as a career. They're given a chance to try their hand at it with a teacher mentor in a primary setting. And there are many such programs in the USA. For example, in New York State, there's Take a Look at Teaching, which has over 40 programs in the state alone. And many have an explicitly stated diversity focus. There's an interactive map on their website which gives you an idea of the range of programs they have in place. In Australia, one program that you could put under this heading, at least partially, is the Remote Area Teacher Education Program, or RATEP, in Queensland, which offers a training pathway for senior secondary students into paraprofessional educator roles via a Cert 3 in education, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, followed by ongoing support to undertake a Bachelor of Education primary. So it's really kind of a combination of an academy, high school academy type program with Grow Your Own. The evidence, well, in the US, given how many programs there were, it was pretty thin for the states we looked at. We found only one formal evaluation that was publicly available anyway on a US academy scheme in Texas, and the evidence on that was inconclusive, really. But back closer to home, RATEP in Queensland looks promising, with 70% of participants remaining teaching in that state. And we're hoping there might be people in the webinar tonight who know more about that, who might be interested in sharing a bit of insight later on. Moving on to bursaries and scholarships. Of course, these have been used to support candidates through teacher education for decades, and many jurisdictions in Australia and overseas currently offer some type of bursary or scholarship to suitable candidates to support their training. Once again, designed to address supply gaps, they usually come with a requirement to take up a position for a specified number of years in a particular school, region or subject area. And in Australia, there are several departments that have scholarships designated to support Indigenous young people who are secondary students or who are enrolled in ITE. And of course, we know there are some big new scholarship initiatives federally and very recently in Victoria, which is pretty exciting. There is evidence that scholarships have a positive effect on recruitment in general, but it seems there's been little research into their impact on specific underrepresented groups. So that's something to be looking at. And moving on to the related debt forgiveness and signing bonuses, particularly important when student debt is high. Obviously, this situation is fluid at the moment. It seems that the research there is into debt forgiveness has not once again focused on the effects for minority groups, and effective for attraction, not necessarily guaranteeing retention. Housing support. In rural and remote Australia, housing provision, subsidies, below market rental agreements and relocation expenses have been used for years to encourage teachers into these areas. And studies in Australia have, for programs that include housing support, have shown that those provisions have been important incentives. The New South Wales Department of Education found that rental subsidies influenced 2 out of 3 teachers to take a role in a rural or remote location. But one important barrier has been the quality of housing. And it appears increasingly that housing support initiatives are needed in urban areas as well, with ever rising property values. According to Scott Ecott at UNSW, 90.8% of teaching positions were in local government areas where the median rent and house sales price are severely unaffordable on a top of the scale teacher salary. So there is a serious affordability problem. And as with student debt forgiveness, housing support schemes have typically focused on supply issues and are targeted at all teachers or ITE candidates and not specifically aimed at those from minority groups. In the US, there's a whole range of different housing support schemes. For example, in California, there's the Extra Credit Teacher Home Purchase Program, the LA Unified School District Affordable Housing Program, the Homes for Heroes scheme and the Teacher Next Door scheme. And the state recently passed laws allowing school districts to buy affordable housing on any spare land they may have and rent accommodation to school staff members. So there's a whole array of possibilities there. But once again, further research is needed to see what the impacts might be for underrepresented groups and whether there are also effects on retention, which you would expect with housing support if it's ongoing, but it needs to be shown. Next, articulation from further education into ITE. This is about enabling students to transfer from diploma courses to initial teacher education. And given that financial, cultural and geographical barriers to vocational educational training are generally lower than those associated with university study, for underrepresented groups. This kind of articulation does show promise as a pathway, assuming that the right supports are in place. But we're not aware of substantial research into the impact of articulation from further ed into ITE when it comes to the teachers in the groups that we're looking at. Next, we've got shifting hurdle requirements. And as many of you will be aware, literacy and numeracy tests like Landtight have been shown to have negative impacts on prospective teachers from diverse backgrounds. And Carver-Thomas in 2018 questioned whether performance on registration exams actually is an indicator of effectiveness. So while redesign and adjustments appear likely to support greater workforce diversity in this area, to our knowledge, that's yet to be demonstrated in research. But the current trials under the National Teacher Workforce Action Plan, which allow candidates more test sittings and improved feedback on their attempts, will be really important to watch. There are calls for reconsideration of test content to address cultural biases and assumed knowledge that may affect the success of underrepresented groups. Now, once they're in, of course, these initiatives that we've just gone through have been focused mainly on attraction and recruitment, but that's only a part of a much more complex jigsaw of factors that we need to consider. And on that note, I'm going to give you all the complexity, Lorraine. I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Alice. Thank you. So the next slide, please. This quote from Dobbin and Cayley from a 2022 large-scale review article, it just reminds us of the importance of creating school cultures that are genuinely inclusive and safe for teachers from historically disadvantaged groups. Teachers from diverse backgrounds should feel valued and supported once they are employed if their recruitment and hiring is to be successful. If we move to the next slide. We know that teacher diversity is a fast-moving field that's garnering all sorts of important information. Clearly, there's recognition of the importance of this area that has been growing over time. So these are some examples of the sorts of initiatives that are around. The next slide, please, Gina. In terms of what the literature is showing, just more broadly on creating inclusive organisations, these points come from some research that was not solely focused on schools. Now, while that is the case, they still have some insights and provide some relevance for educational settings. One of these that I'd like to particularly highlight is second from the end. And this comes from Dobbin and Caleb in 2022, who found that hiring a diversity manager boosted management diversity above and beyond the effects of particular programs that were put in place. The next one. Okay. In terms of our research too, we also saw in the literature that we reviewed the importance of not turning a minority group member into the person responsible for everything to do with that minority group in a school. The phenomenon that I'm talking about, we've coined it as outgroup overload. And for example, our Faculty of Education colleague, Melita Hogarth, in 2019, she wrote about her own experiences as an Indigenous teacher, where she was seen as the cultural expert in the school, responsible for all Indigenous programs, all the relationships with the Indigenous parents, the implementation of policies related to indigeneity, and so on. And it's this kind of cultural overload that's been identified for Indigenous workers generally as a problem. So next, please. And lastly from me, these dot points cover what else the literature indicates can be put in place to create school cultures that support teachers generally. And I'm sure you'll be aware of these. They strongly indicate that quality working conditions are extremely important, and they influence teachers' decisions about whether to remain in teaching or to leave. And these points also reinforce the contribution that school level factors have on teacher retention. And yet there's more. And now I'll turn over to you, Suzanne, just to continue with some more issues and some more opportunities to consider in this area.
Thanks, Lorraine. So one of the arguments that we would like to make is there's often in policy discourse, there's been quite a bit of talk in the last 15 or 20 years about quality teachers as this sort of individual phenomenon. And I might say I've done some of that research too. But we are making the argument in our report that we need to start shifting our thinking from quality individual teachers to a quality teacher workforce, a collective notion. And we see this as having four components. The first is a quality social and policy ecosystem where there's respect for teachers, where there's a contribution, teachers are consulted on policy and so on, where parents are respecting teachers. Then we see the next level up as quality working conditions. There's obviously a huge amount of public debate around that at the moment, but working conditions where the workload's reasonable and where teachers are freed up to concentrate on what they love and what they do best, which is teaching. Above that, we have quality initial teacher education and also professional learning for teachers once they're in, which capitalises and embeds diversity and diverse perspectives. And finally, at the top, obviously, a workforce of capable and diverse teachers that represent the students they're teaching. So in the next slide, what I'd like to talk about is the next phase of the work that we've been talking about on the team, and we've also been having discussions with colleagues internationally, just to alert people to this and also see if there's any interest out there in working with us. So what we'd like to do is we've been talking about a 3-year policy co-design project where we work with policymakers and with students from, or individuals from marginalised groups. In the first year, we'd be looking at school students with an interest in teaching from some of those marginalised groups we've been talking about, sitting down with policymakers and policies and talking about what would and wouldn't work, and working to look at potential new solutions to some of those policy problems that would help them, that they see would help them move into teaching. The second year, we'd be talking to ITE students from marginalised groups, again, looking at policies that are available to support them into teaching and how effective they are and what else might work. And then finally, current teachers from marginalised groups, focusing largely on retention. And we would do this in an iterative way so that each of the groups would have access to and be able to comment on findings from each of the other year levels. So we are keen to understand from anybody in the audience whether there's some interest in this and if there are policymakers who would like to be involved. The other thing we're interested in, if I can have the next slide, Janelle, is we're interested in the possibility of forming a research network focused on increasing teacher diversity. As I've said, we've been in contact with researchers from Cambridge, from Sweden, and we are interested, Jo Lampert from Monash we've been working with, and we're interested in understanding if there are researchers listening today who'd be keen on joining us to form this network. So when I've finished speaking, we're going to give people 2 minutes to fill in. We've got a little questionnaire that will be coming up on the slide, is it, Janelle? Okay, and you'll be able to click into that. And then after that, we'll come back for questions. Okay, is that coming up?
The first poll should be visible for everyone, and once we've given everyone a couple of minutes to answer that one, I'll launch the second poll. Suzanne, I can also open the chat to everyone if you like, in case the poll
doesn't. That would be great.
Great.
Yeah. So if you can't access the poll, we'd be very happy to have your feedback in the chat.
Suzanne, there's a question that's come through the chat from Linnell, which I think is a really good one. What policies are there at Melbourne Uni to diversify its workforce, especially in the School of Education? There might be a few people in this webinar who are able to answer that better than I am.
I would say, Linnell, that there's quite a bit in the Indigenous space now and quite a lot of work in their target set and policies to support recruitment. I'm not aware of, but it's not my specialty area either, of other areas. Lorraine, do you know of anything in the disability space?
I think it's part of the broader UOM diversity and inclusion push.
Policy.
And of course, we do have an emphasis on that.
Okay, do we want to move to the next poll, Janelle?
Yes, I'll do that now.
Thank you.
And if anyone didn't have time to answer the first one, you can always pop things in the chat too. Thanks. Also, I'll just share a link to the Faculty of Education's Diversity and Inclusion webpage.
Thank you. Shall we move to question time? Jim, are you happy to chair the questions? Field the questions? Not sure.
Yeah,
now,
I
sorry?
am here, but it might be easier if you just take them direct, Suzanne. But
That's fine. I'm happy to take them directly, or we're happy to take them directly. Thanks, Jim. Okay, so do we have any questions either in the chat, or I think people are able to raise their hands?
I've actually got a question because I know there's quite a few people here from both the Victorian and the Queensland Departments of Education who I think have been, active in these areas, and it would be wonderful to hear about where your work is at in relation to some of the initiatives we've been looking at, or things that you've found have been particularly effective. Maybe in the chat.
We've also had a question here. What can you share on better evaluation of future programs? I think it's probably not even a case of better evaluations as so much as any evaluations, that there appear to be a lot of policy initiatives out there where there hasn't really been any sort of serious and substantial evaluation. I know Stephen Gorrod and Ben Watley from Durham have done a bit of work in this field and have talked about the fact that in many instances there just simply isn't any evaluation whatsoever. Or it's extremely scant. If it is there, it's a few questions. So I think it's just a question of more rigorous evaluations, hopefully that have a time element to them so that they can see the effect over time, and more substantial work in the area. There's not a lot that appears to have been done. Tim Delaney raised his hand. Tim, let's see if I can...
Hi, can you guys hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Fabulous. Yeah, look, thank you for your presentation. It's really, it's really powerful, and obviously, it's exciting to know that there's there's systems around the world that are grappling with this problem, and we can sort of learn collaboratively in this space. And sorry, I did have to drop out once or twice, so apologies if you've kind of touched on this, but in a previous role before I came to research, I worked with government school principals across Victoria, during COVID and after COVID, particularly as they were grappling with real recruitment challenges. And I wondered whether you'd had a chance to connect with many school principals, particularly those ones in the areas of Victoria that have really struggled with recruitment, and had conversations with them about some of their thinking about diversity and who are the sorts of teachers that they're actually looking at employing in their schools, and how this teacher shortage has perhaps created opportunities for them, to kind of have another look at how they construct their workforce planning. So sorry if that was a bit convoluted as a question.
No, that's fine.
I think principals are a useful group to talk to.
Look, we haven't, the scope of the research is that it's desktop research, so that there isn't the time or the funding within the scholarship for us to be able to get ethics and go out and interview and so on. Certainly, we would love to do that as a subsequent stage of the research. There's so much that still needs to be done in the research space in this area, that what's there is largely fledgling. So yeah, look, I think that's something that absolutely has to be done. But as I said, within the scope of the research, it was desktop. We had a short timeline, and there wasn't any capacity in that for us to go out and speak to schools. It was through the literature and through websites. Did we have any other comments from the team?
I'd just say that it's our work too was informed by your previous work, Suzanne, which has been about these sorts of settings that Tim has mentioned, and how you solve some of the problems around hard
schools. Yeah.
Could I just pick up, actually going back to the question about better evaluation of future programs? I think what struck me when I was trying to find, particularly for the US, whether there had been evaluations of different programs, sometimes there'd be mentions of evaluations, but they had clearly not been made publicly available. So perhaps a researcher had access to an evaluation or had spoken to somebody, and so you felt like there was perhaps, there were internal evaluations that had been done of programs that were not shared. And, there are all sorts of reasons why that might be, but I think that was one thing that I became aware of, is that, there's public evaluations and then there's not public evaluations, but all the information is really valuable. So perhaps part of it's also about how do we encourage the sharing of those internal evaluations, even if they're somewhat stripped back, so that we get the kind of essential data from them.
Laniel, I noticed have we made connection with the AEU? Not yet, but it's on the to-do list.
Well, my other suggestion is both AEU and the Principals Association. And I'd ask them to put in some money to enable stage 2 of this research. It's worth asking.
Yes.
In the Education Department, are they prepared to tip in a bit of money? Because if you could get another 20 or 40,000, that takes it to the next stage.
Any other further questions? Andrea.
Hi, so I'm Andrea. I'm the Deputy Secretary of Schools. Andrea Delmonico, the Deputy Secretary of the Schools Workforce Group in the Victorian Government. We are working very hard on this, and we've had a number of initiatives that were funded in the 23-24 budget, and also later in a budget that was released in September. So from a timing perspective, it's probably outside the scope of your February till April timeframe. I'm very interested in working with you on the evaluation piece, because we're clearly in the design phase of these things. But for the rest of the group, just in terms of what we're doing, significant amounts of money going in to a number of general programs, and then within those general programs, we are providing additional support for certain cohorts of people to ensure that we've got a more diverse workforce. So the first one we've got is these innovative ITE programs. Originally it was in the postgraduate space, so this is where people work and study at the same time, and we've got 8 different universities providing these. What this work and study at the same time, we're providing sort of bursaries along the way, and this and we're seeing the retention rates in these programs are significantly higher than a normal undergraduate course, and that's because people are being financially supported along the way. So I think the economic position here is a really important one when we think about diversity. The other thing that we're finding with those postgraduate innovative programs is that we're seeing a more diverse workforce than we would see. So we are seeing more men, and we're seeing a lot more science and maths coming through that. So that's been a really positive, unexpected impact of those programs, where we provide fundings, for example, a bursary of $10,000 for the general cohort, special cohorts, so Aboriginal people from African backgrounds receive a larger amount of support through those programs. The next one we've got is then the scholarships, which people have heard, which is similar to the nursing scholarships. So they're for the 24 and the 25 cohorts, and that will be providing funding for people to undertake training in the undergraduate and the postgraduate space, where they'll receive $2,000 or $3,000 in the undergraduate space per year. For say a normal course might cost, a Commonwealth supported place might be $17,000. You might receive a few $1,000s per year for 4 years while you undertake your undergraduate training, and then additional funding of $4,000 or $5,000 per year when you spend time in the government system once you're finished. So the support is for all people who undertake the teacher education, but if you're in the government system, you receive that additional funding at the end. And then if they're moved to hard to staff schools, there's even more incentives provided there. The other important one that we're doing is paid placements. So we're hearing a lot inside of End and the like. We have got $16 million a year for the next 2 years, which is really significant amount of funding for paid placements. So people that are doing paid placements in rural, regional or specialist schools will receive funding, and it's tiered so that to encourage our people from metropolitan and our big regional centres to go out to our hardest to staff schools, and that will go to this cost of living issue. And for those people that previously would have just had to find a school close to home, they will then be able to reach out and move further afield. And we're really hoping that our schools will use the schools that normally wouldn't get access to a diverse pool of people will then be able to attract and retain those people. So there are a few of them. The other one we've got is $13 million, which is a significant amount of money for and it's a really tailored approach for to encourage First Nations people into the education. So that's a different and tailored approach, where that's a program where we're looking at ed support and helping people who are currently more people to become ed support, people who are ed support to train to be teachers, people who are already teaching, and what supports do they need to stay in the workforce, and then people that have left the workforce, how can we retain and bring them back into the workforce? So, and that's a community, working with community and being designed by community to develop that. So a number of really exciting, interesting initiatives. The other big one is Career Start, where most of the graduates, which is basically a mentored support program for our graduates, that will be rolling out to most graduates across Victoria in 24 and in 25. We've got a lot in the system for 24 and 25, and so evaluation is going to be critical to see whether that makes a difference in terms of the retention of our people. We know the economic position is really preventing people from staying in their training and then in those early years of their course. So we're hoping this will have an impact, and we're very keen to work with the University of Melbourne, really deeply interested in the work that you're doing, but also in the evaluation. And we'd be keen to do further work with other states on this, because we're starting and we're learning, and not everything we're doing is hitting the mark. So we've got a program to re-engage in active teachers. We thought we would have more demand for that, but maybe we haven't designed that the right way. We're looking at flexible work, and that's proving to be really a great initiative for leaders to be able to do a job share arrangement. So we've got lots of things out there, and it's about pivoting and being able to get early reads on what's working, and then being able to tailor that and adapting that quickly. So that's it from me, but yeah, really deeply interested in this work, and we really appreciate being included in the conversation today.
And can I say, we can't wait to talk to you. It sounds like there's so much that's been happening in this space since we first did our scan, and we've been aware of some, possibly not all of it, and it will be terrific to have a discussion. So we will certainly be in contact with you.
Great.
We had one other question here in the chat. I understand it wasn't a focus of the study, but I'm interested if you came across or have general thoughts on the underrepresentation of male teachers as a problem in building a diverse workforce. So we were limited in our scan in terms of what we had the space, and we wanted to try and target groups where there was an issue with underachievement and with marginalisation, and also with where there was some evidence that teachers from that background were able to raise the achievement of the students in that group. So certainly, I mean, I think as an overall aim, you'd have to say that it would be terrific to get more men in teaching, and that it's really important to do. The evidence, while there's certainly evidence that boys are tending to underachieve, that's a fairly complex space, but relative to girls, they certainly are. There doesn't seem to be much evidence. The evidence we had a look at doesn't suggest that male teachers necessarily support higher achievement amongst male students. Now, that may be important for other reasons, for role models and so on, but certainly it was outside the scope. But we would still say, yes, it's really important to encourage young men or older men into teaching as well. So again, within that theory of representative bureaucracy, where you've got a better representation, what's happening in schools will better cater to the needs of the various diverse groups. Any other thoughts from my team members? I don't know that we have any further questions. Oh, hold on. One, sorry. Have you, or are you planning at looking at international examples of impactful initiatives or applicable lessons from comparable sectors? Again, I think it was just outside the scope of our research. We would love to be doing some further work in that area in terms of whether there are other sectors. Our work on retaining staff from diverse groups did draw quite heavily on more general work in that area, simply because there doesn't seem to be very much done at all in the research literature yet on how we retain teachers from those backgrounds. Okay, that looks as if, sorry, Lorraine, were you saying something? No?
Yes, I was. There was another question in the Q&A that
Oh, sorry.
that was asking about the diversity and inclusion manager, that are just one of the list of the things that were indicated from research that didn't necessarily only focus on schools. It was more about organisations and what could make a difference. So I did put as an answer, but now I'm not exactly sure where it's gone. The names of the researchers, yes, that had made that point, and that was Dobbin and Caleb in 2022. And the idea was that by having a dedicated role, it really did help the organisations to become more diverse over and above the programs that were offered. So that was what the sort of the research was showing. And I can, I think I've put the researcher's name in the Q&A chat.
Also, the report is still online,
Yes,
and all of the research we've referred to here is listed in the reference list at the back of the report, so you'll be able to find anything.
And if you would really rather read a hard copy, email me and I'll send you one, because I know some people just want to have a piece of paper in their hands, like me.
Okay, I think we've covered all the questions. I'd like to thank everyone. Oh, no, sorry, Jennifer's raised her hand, sorry. So Jennifer. No, doesn't seem to be there. Okay. All right, thank you everybody very much. Thank you, Lynelle. Did you want to say something further? Oh, you're on mute, Lynelle.
I think there's been some fantastic observations. I reckon it'd be great that Andrea's happy to work with your team, because get to the core of it. And just a thing I'll throw in there, possibly for Andrea to help out with, is I know at my daughter's school, which is in Tarneet, where they've got 2,300 kids and a massive teacher shortage. So all 7 of the APs are teaching, as well as doing the assistant principal job. And my daughter loves it. She loves being back in the classroom. She said, just put the rest of my job, I've got to do a lot of work on the weekend. Their major problem is getting visas for teachers they've recruited. So it's maybe not a state issue, a federal issue, but that is another thing that's getting in the way of, is they've got people they've interviewed and they want them, but it takes ages for those visas to come through. So just another thing, but I think this fantastic discussion today, I love the idea of having a diversity, somebody managing the diversity in a school, both for the kids and the staff. So, and you don't want that one person who suddenly becomes the diverse person having to do everything. That's hopeless. So well done. Well done, team.
Thank you. Jim, did you want to close?
Yeah, I just wanted to congratulate you all for the report to start with. I think it's a really important issue that we all care about, but we find it difficult to change. And so some of the concepts and strategies that you've talked about will help build opportunity, I think, to think differently about the people in our schools. So it's the beginning of a really long conversation. I'm really impressed that people from different states and school systems wanting to be part of this conversation. So we want you to stick with us, and we really do want to build a strategy going forward that will change the nation, not just individual schools. So congratulations to all of you involved in the writing of the paper, but also for the presentation today and the availability that I know that you will all have in terms of facilitating conversation and outcomes going forward. So we'll look forward to continue to speaking to everyone.